Welcome back to this series on Adam Smith's theory of value. In past episodes, we introduced Smith's labor-embodied theory of value via a thought experiment that Smith calls the early and rude state of society. The simple version of the early and rude state that we've been discussing so far holds any differences in the tools, skills, or hardship necessary between industries as constant. In this episode, we're going to relax those assumptions. It follows from the simple version of the early and rude state we've been exploring so far that it's not only the labor immediately involved in the production of a commodity which determines its value. Its value is also determined by the labor embodied in products expended in the labor process, that is, of capital or skill. Imagine, for example, the act of hunting a beaver requires the use of a special kind of arrow, whose furnishing takes 1 hour of labor. If one of these arrows must be furnished for each beaver hunted, on top of the 2 hours required for the immediate act of poaching, one beaver should naturally exchange for 3 deer, or 3 of any other commodity which requires 1 hour of labor to create. Thus, the labor involved in the creation of capital used in production contributes to the value of commodities. The same goes for skilling. Smith says, quote, that there may be more labor in an hour's application to a trade which it costs 10 years of labor to learn than in a month's industry as an ordinary and obvious employment. What Smith is pointing out here is that if a hunter must spend 1 hour learning how to catch beavers for every 2-hour beaver catching session, the total labor involved will come out to 3 hours, and one beaver will exchange for 3 deer. Like the capital used in production, the skills used in production contribute to the value of commodities. The labor expended on skills and capital in order to produce a commodity can be referred to as indirect labor. The amount of time necessary for skilling to occur has the potential to affect the mobility of producers. The longer the duration of skilling necessary, the longer producers will take to migrate towards higher rates of return. Increased supply to a commodity will quickly meet a surge in demand when the skills necessary to create that supply can be acquired by the relevant population instantaneously. Producers who must take a great deal of time to be skilled in increasingly more profitable crafts will take longer before they can transition into those crafts, causing market prices to oscillate farther from their natural levels. One mitigation against the supply flexibility that's impeded by the necessity of skilling is the possibility of distributing that skilling more evenly throughout a career. If a producer can split the hours of his day between learning a new craft and beginning to apply himself in it, his capacity to produce the new commodity in question will scale more gradually with the expansion of his skills. A workman who's able to apply himself to his craft in gradual proportion to his abilities as they expand will also be able to divert himself to learning another craft with fewer delayed returns, that is, with less risk. Producers will be more mobile to the degree that their movement is less risky in this regard. To the degree that indirect labor can be embodied in tools rather than skills, there is some potential for the mobility of producers to be more fluid. This is because skill switching generally takes longer than tool switching. Producers who must learn a new ability must set aside some deal of time to gain it. It's often only after a distinct period that they're practiced enough to supply the commodity in question. This is not the same with tools. If the prerequisite to transition into a more profitable industry is not know-how, but ownership of a tool, the transition can occur as soon as the tool is brought to market. For this reason, the mobility of labor may be increased to the degree that timely skill acquisition is lessened by equivalent amounts of labor expended in the production of tools. This proposition rests on the assumption that tools which replace skilling have already been brought to market when the incentives for producers to migrate kicks into gear. For this reason, it holds to a lesser degree in economies of lesser scale when the production of tools takes the same absolute time as skilling. An economy of fewer producers and fewer consumers rarely has a stock of commodities already produced that can help meet a new demand for tools. However, in economies of scale, or what Smith would call economies with a large extent of the market, This is not the case. The sheer size of a market increases the probability that some producers will already have produced a stock of commodities that can assist in meeting a new demand for tools. The extent to which such tools can replace skilling, as tends to be more the case in economies of greater size, provides greater flexibility for producers to move between sectors. The hardship of a task additionally modifies how a quantity of labor is conceived to begin with. Note that Smith's labor embodied theory simplifies the idea of a quantity of labor to the amount of time laborers spent in production, what could be referred to as, say, labor hours or labor time. Although the reduction of labor quantity into hours has been useful for analysis, it should be noted that it's particularly abstract. As Smith correctly observes, the equating of labor quantity to hours worked does not account for, quote, the different degrees of hardship endured and ingenuity exercised in different trades, and thus the time spent in different sorts of work will not always determine the quantity of labor embodied in a commodity. This is because producers will not move into certain sectors in search of higher hourly incomes to the extent that producers perceive the production processes of those sectors as harder or more unpleasant. Thus, through what Smith calls the higgling and bargaining of the market, a rough equality of value between fewer hours of difficult labor and more hours of easier labor is made. In the context of our earlier example, this might play out as deer hunters refusing to migrate into the beaver hunting industry because beaver hunting is perceived as more unpleasant. So when we speak of a quantity of labor, we must keep in mind that it includes both a time and a hardship variable. So far in this series, we've been discussing mostly Adam Smith's labor embodied theory of value. It's not the only theory of value that Smith puts forward in his Wealth of Nations. He also makes the case for an adding up theory of value and what might be called a labor commanded theory of value. In future episodes, we're going to describe the adding up and labor commanded theories, and we're going to separate those theories out from the labor embodied theory. If you're a graduate student or a professor studying economics, particularly history of economic thought, and you have some interesting work you'd be willing to share with me, I'd like to speak with you. Please reach out to me by filling out the form linked in the description of this episode. If you're studying economics at the undergraduate or high school level and you're in need of a tutor, I may be able to help you. You can get in contact with me by filling out that same form. If you'd like to see more content like this, where I discuss various topics in the history of economic thought, please consider checking out my YouTube channel. See you in the next episode.